I'm Steven. I'm a guide in McClellanville, South Carolina, a little north of here. Love to redfish. We also fish redfish tournaments together. It's my partner.
Nick Winch. I got out of Isle Palms.
So yeah, we're going to talk about winter creek fishing for redfish. Obviously, it's cold, it's windy. So today's a perfect day to be in here, but you can still go out and just annihilate fish in this weather right here. So do y'all fish a lot in the winter? Or do you normally fish spring to fall? Like what do y'all normally tend to do? 12 months a year, you're pretty addicted. Yeah, it's pretty fun. Well, cool. Let's jump in. Um, First, we want to start out with the best creeks that hold fish and what makes a good creek. So, when we're traveling or even just out in the marsh, when you're looking for a new creek, like, I wonder if that holds fish, specifically redfish, we're going to go through a bunch of things that we went down and wrote and even have applied and tried when we're looking for new creeks and what makes a good creek fishing. So, we'll let Nick kick us off.
All right,
Um,
so yeah, we got 3 key factors that we're looking for when we're trying to find a good creek: bait, depth, and structure. So obviously bait, fish got to eat to survive. They're not going to spend their time, they're not going to spend their winter in a creek that has no bait. That's probably the number one thing I look for. I don't, Steven, he fishes a little different area than I do. I fish around Isle Palms and the Wando River, so I get real good, clean water. So I can see bait real easy a lot of times. In the wintertime, you still have finger mullet in the creeks, but they're just down, like they're down on the bottom. So as you're cruising through those creeks, you might see a dark spot, and it's just the bottom of the creek is covered in finger mullet. If I see that, like, I'm very happy. Um, Depth, I like a creek that has at least 3 to 4 foot of depth with some shallow bars, whether it's sandbars, oyster bars. Um, the oyster bars, kind of jump in with the structure side of things. Oyster bars, docks, trees, pilings.
And that's at low tide. So the depth,
Yeah,
he said 3 to 4 feet. That's at low tide.
yeah,
And so the tide, the best tide for this, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. The best tide, I like a mid-fall tide all the way through low, and the first of the rise. That seems to be the most productive. So especially now in the winter, I'm going to hand pick my days that I'm running charters. You can ask John. We've rescheduled a couple times, but we go on very specific days this time of year because I know, like, yeah, we can go catch fish on a rise tide right now or a fall, but if you want to have the best trips where you're going to go out and just whack them and have a lot of fun with artificials or whatever, I definitely want a good tide. So
yeah. That's also if you're out looking for new creeks, because you could go into 10 creeks and 1 or 2 of them is probably going to hold fish. Um, so having the right day definitely helps. Learning new creeks. Once you learn the creek, you can go out on a nasty day and throw the right bait to them, and you'll crush them this time of year.
You all say the right day. Is there more weather patterns or tide patterns?
really tides.
What are you looking for there?
I want a jet in the winter when it's cold. Okay, so especially like this week, we're about to get snow and all that. So I want a warming trend. All right. Normally at least the second or third day. So like the cold will come in. On I think on Saturday it's going to start to warm up a little bit. Right. We'll have a high in the 50s. High might touch 60. Lows are in the 40s. If you got a day or two of that, and then you got a low tide, I like a low tide at like 10 in the morning or later this time of year. Because that way, when that water drops out, all those mud flats and oyster bars or rocks, all that's going to catch all that sunlight and warm up. And then when the water comes back in and hits it, the temperature's going to go up. And so then you'll start to see happier fish cruising around, feeding and all that. Like if you got a low tide at 7 in the morning, those fish might be really cold. You can still catch them. You're just going to have to grind and put the bait in front of them 1,000 times, put Procure on there, and hope they bite. So another thing we talked about structure a little bit. When I'm looking at creeks, one, I'm using Google Earth. So no matter where we're fishing, if we go down to Beaufort for a tournament or Florida or just traveling around to places we haven't been, I'm on Google Earth. Here, I'll pull it up real quick. And or Google Maps here. And I'll go ahead and start looking for creeks. For me, I'm gonna look for a creek with a bend and a dock. Easy, so easy. So we fished a bend, a creek bend with a dock a couple days ago. And if you saw any of our promotional videos I've been posting on Facebook, we shot videos there. And I've never fished there before. We went in there and I don't know, we caught 50 something fish in a couple hours. But so let me find one here real quick. This stuff's, it's very you can replicate this anywhere you go through the Southeast. So, here it works great, but
in certain areas that you look at on maps too, if it's the picture's taken at low tide, you'll be able to see the deeper holes, the oyster bars, the sandbars, and kind of be able to see like where those fish would be sitting at low tide,
all right.
Versus going in blind.
So you can see hearts. So if I just pull up Google Earth and looking around, you can just find any creek. And if you find a dock in that creek, I'll go ahead and just mark it. It's like a bend, and then there'll be like one dock there. Odds are pretty high that it's probably, if you find bait, like Nick was talking about, and you fish it on the right tide, there's probably gonna be fishing there. I'm willing to bet on that.
Are you saying the bend in the dock is more critical than having bend and oyster bed?
If there, well, it depends on the creek. So, some creeks, if there's like a single dock in that creek, that is probably going to be, more productive than a bend in an oyster bed.
Like an isolated piece of
But
structure.
now, and it just depends, and it also depends on the tide. Depending on the depth of the creek and everything. At low tide, they might slide down to that dock to use it as protection. In case a dolphin comes up in that creek, they're not going to get destroyed by the dolphin. And at a higher tide, while it's still falling out, they might be up at another bend with an oyster bed, ambushing bait. But they might use that dock solely as protection, not for feeding and stuff like that. So it just kind of depends on the creek.
Another thing that I look for is I like the creek to be possibly, depending on the tide height, I like it to get closed off at low tide. So there might be a sandbar in the mouth of the creek, an oyster bar, some sort of barrier to where the fish can be in the creek and be safe, from dolphins, because normally they're hiding out from dolphins. And then like the depth. So especially for me, I'm looking for a sandbar in the mouth, and then I'll probably have like a pothole or a drop in the creek. So it'll be 3, 4, 5 feet deep on the backside of the bar. And then there might be another oyster bar, and then another drop, another oyster bar. That's a good pattern. Normally those will hold fish. So personally, when I'm finding new creeks that hold fish, I'll try it a couple times. I'll try it at a mid tide or a bottom low and get trapped in the creek. You can put the bow of your boat up onto the bar, stand off on the bar and fish in the little hole. That'll hold fish. It's so much fun. It's fun to fly fish that way too.
But then you also have, so depending on the area you're fishing to, you also have different creeks. So, some of the creeks that I'll fish like up north towards Georgetown, like there's no structure in the creeks. Like there's no oyster bars. There might be like, one or two old pilings or something like that. That fishing those creeks, I fish so much different than I would fish like creeks around Alapalms or the Wanda, where I'm looking for like an oyster bar and like a drop off behind it or something. Fishing those creeks, I mean, it's almost like I'm just power fishing, covering water, thrown into the middle of the creek, especially when it's cold like this. All those fish are going to slide down to the middle of the creek. And some of the creeks, they're half as wide as this room. So, I'm making casts straight down the middle in front, and, you can crush them doing that. And, I surprise myself sometimes finding creeks that like I wouldn't think there should be fish in them, but it holds bait. So, there's no structure, but the bait's there. So the fish are there. So that's another big thing if you're fishing like the Georgetown area, or maybe some stuff down like in Beaufort and stuff like that. Because not everywhere is the same in terms of creek fishing.
Is a creek bend with trees. Okay, trees like falling in the water, like if there's pine trees nearby falling in, very popular, like Edisto South. When we go down there for tournaments, I find those spots on Google Earth, go there, and we just crush them, and like very frequently. So that seems to be an easy pattern that you can pick up here. There's some places around here that have that I fished and caught them. But again, like I use, Google Earth's huge, so you can save a lot of time by getting a Google Earth, finding spots, little funnels. So like at low tide, if you can see a sandbar on Google Earth and an oyster bar, and then you can see like there's a little hole. Well, that might be something you might want to mark and try and get to and fish. And you just skipped days and days of on the water time by just sitting on your phone at night, drinking something cold or something hot, whatever your taste is, and just scouting on here. So another thing, talked about docks. In the winter, I like creeks that are closer to mainland or farther up the river. All right, so here we got the Cooper, the Wando, the Ashley, and Beaufort. You got the Combahee. There's what's the other one down there? You got the Broad River. In Georgetown, you got the Sam. You got a bunch of these rivers, right? So those rivers, I like to start from like the intercoastal and work up towards mainland because the fish tend to migrate in the fall. They'll migrate closer in to that brackish water. Okay. Normally they like rivers like that because it's a little deeper. So the water temperature might be a little colder when you're closer to mainland, but the water tends to be more stable. So the water temp's not going to change as drastically as it will on a flat that might be 3 feet deep, like in one of these other creeks that we're talking about. So if I'm going out for a day fishing in the winter, like next week, right after the snow comes through, I'll probably start in a couple of creeks that hold water at 3 foot deep. It's kind of shallow. I'll try one or two. If that doesn't work, I'm going to go to a river, or I'm going to fish the intercoastal or somewhere a little bit deeper. So I'm going to look for that 5 to 10 foot depth range. Just because if the fish are super cold, they're going to be deep. So they'll be 5 to 10 foot deep redfish at low tide, and they might be a little more apt to eat. So tides, we kind of touched on that. Mid-fall through the first of the rising tide seems to be my favorite. I said a low tide anywhere from 10 a.m. or later. Okay. And then another thing, this is a little technical. If you can pair a solunar period with the last few hours of the falling tide. All right. So whenever the moon and the sun are opposite, so directly overhead, directly underfoot, or if the moon's rising or setting, if you compare that time with the last couple hours of the falling tide, that seems to be the best action, where you'll catch fish every cast on artificials, and fish will just feed like crazy. And you're like, why is this happening? And you look up that data, and you're like, oh, we had a solunar period happen at the same time. So it's not just a coincidence that you go out and have a really good day, and then you have a crap day the next time. Something caused that. So solunarforecast.com. Write that down. That's the website that I use to get the Solunar info on. That's solunarforecast.com. I'm pretty sure that's correct. You just punch your zip code in, and there'll be a chart for the whole month. So anytime I'm going somewhere new, especially around a full moon or a new moon, John and I have had epic trout days because we've fished on a solunar cycle period. Okay, so look that up. That'll give you some like really good days on the water. Or if you see people posting on Facebook or whatever, man, we crushed them today. Like figure out, hey, pull the solunar cycle up and see. Oh, look, we're 2 days before a new moon or full moon. All that has something to do with it. You don't just get lucky. I promise. Sometimes you do, but normally you're not just getting lucky. You can create your own success.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
You're good.
So the solunar periods is kind of when the fish are supposed to be like more active and feeding. So it's when the moon is directly above your head or directly under your feet. You might not always be able to see it, or like rising or setting.
Mm-hmm.
But those are supposed to be times when like, not just fish, but other like animals like deer and stuff are more active, like they're on the move. So that, this kind of translates to like other kinds of fish, not just like creek fishing. You know, like I believe it for tarpon fishing. You know, fishing like a major, and then trout, especially trout.
Especially
But
big trout.
yeah,
Big trout. Whenever I'm targeting big trout here, this is a side note. I know we're talking about redfish. Starting in about April 1st, I normally always catch a big trout in April. Like, 20 or up, 20-inch or up. Starting April, I like to fish on the full moons and then the days leading up to and the full moon. The days after the full moon are normally crap. But anyway, that's just a side note. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, tides. Let's talk about tackle, Nick.
Yeah.
What do you like to throw?
All right.
What's
So
your go-to rods, reels?
we'll start out with the lures, because that kind of depends on the rod that I throw. But obviously a lot of the stuff in the wintertime is like your Ned rigs, you know, your small finesse baits.
Let's
your
talk about
light baits.
artificial versus live bait first.
Okay.
We didn't write that down, but that would be a
Yeah.
good
So
topic.
you know, for live bait, cut bait, on those days where it's high pressure and those fish are really locked up, you know, chunking a piece of frozen shrimp or cut mullet out there, you know, and just dead sticking it, letting it sit. Like you probably do pretty good doing that. And then, but I mean, even throwing some small stuff to those fish, working it real slow. Personally, I struggle working things slow. I'm not, I'm a power fisherman, and you can still, like, I work things fast all the time. Like, I think my longest pause fishing soft plastics is like a second.
Yeah.
And I have no problem catching fish. They say if you think you're working it slow, work it slower. I don't have time for that. I'm trying to cover water.
And I'm crawling. I'm in the back of the boat just crawling.
Steven's telling me to slow down.
The boat's going 100 mile an hour.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I didn't get to fish this creek, this little ditch over here, man. Slow down.
I mean, like the other day, me and Steven were out and we were fishing the creek, and it was a bluebird day, high pressure. Kind of those conditions where you're told, like, work it really slow. If you think you're working it slow, work it slower. And I was doing my technique, catching them no problem. Steven was working it nice and slow with a lighter jig head. He was catching them no problem. So you kind of find your technique, and if it works, stick with it. There are a few things that I work slow, but soft plastics, I'm not really great at it.
Live bait. So
Yeah.
a quarter ounce or a 3/16 or a quarter ounce jig head and a live mud minnow will work wonders if you're struggling. Okay. I love to throw artificials, especially from November through about March. I don't even keep live bait on my boat unless I've got a kid's trip, because the kids love to play with mud minnows. But normally I just do all artificials because I'm not worried about it, because the fishing's that good. If you got enough stuff like the goby, that's one of my favorite baits. Just a little tiny, that's a little bass bait. Okay, you crush 30-inch reds on that little guy. But yeah, that mimics a mud minnow. That's why it works so good. So just a little live mud minnow, you can go grab them from Hadrill's, and you can throw them in a bucket and throw them in your garage and forget about them, and they'll still be alive next month normally. So go get a couple dozen, throw them in the boat and your live, or throw them in your live on your boat, and just forget about them. Then you always got a backup plan, right? So if you're struggling with artificials, you can do that. But so yeah, mud minnows. I normally don't mess with cut bait. I personally can't stand to soak cut bait. Go ahead.
On the goby, what jig head are you using?
I have right here. I throw the finesse, the I Strike finesse, Texas eye. You can get 3-packs, or you can go get a bulk pack on their website. It's a lot cheaper actually. But that little guy, it's a one. I throw a 1/6 to 1/10 ounce jig head for the little stuff. All right. It's a light hook, so you can't fish with a tight drag. You got to have a nice light drag so you don't bust fish off or bend the hook. Okay. But you can catch monster fish on. I've caught 35-inch reds on docks with this. You just got to play them right. Light drag, and then I use my finger on the spool if I need to apply a little pressure. So we got the finesse TRD. This is one of my personal favorites. no matter where I'm fishing. It's just a little bass bait, little worm. All right, that little guy, that is the Goby Bryant color. That is about all I throw in the winter. And then I'll just put this on weedless. That's a bent one. Let's get a straight one.
And that bait's great too, because that bait kind of mimics, a couple of different kinds of bait fish, whether it's, small mullet, mud minnow, a worm.
Right there. All right. That little guy. And I'll put Procure, your little bottle of Procure. I'll put Procure on it on the side. So I'll just do a little squirt here, a little squirt there, and then you got the scent going on. So like I'll work this. I'll either slow reel it to where it's just kind of swimming through the water column, like the middle water column, or I'll hop it on the bottom, or I'll drag it, let it sit on the bottom, and then a little special tip. Z-Man makes little rattles. It's called a rattlesnaker. So you can get this little tool. Some people think it's a joke and all that. I think it works awesome. So you can catch way more fish on this. Throw a little rattle on the inside of this. So then when it's sitting, you give your rod a little twitch. You got this thing rattling down there. That'll give you a little upper hand. If you're fishing pressured water, always do little things like that. So throw a rattle in your bait. The rattle will work in any of these, most of these bigger body baits. Put a rattle in there because most people don't do that. So anything that you can do that gives you a little upper edge, you can make fish bite that normally won't bite just a standard artificial. What you got, Nick?
Um,
That is the Finesse TRD Goby Bryant. Here, just pass it around. You can look at it.
so let's see. Another thing for choosing your baits for the creeks. If I'm fishing a little bit north and there's not a whole lot of structure, not a lot of oysters in the creek, I'll tend to go to more of a bait fish pattern artificial, whether it's a slim swim or like a 3-inch minnow or a 4-inch jerk shad, because most of the bait in that creek is mullet, and then fishing more areas with shells and oysters and docks and stuff like that. I'm a huge fan of creature baits. You have the TRD bugs, and I think this kind of looks like a crab to me. This thing still has a fish scale on it from catching fish. Another huge one that I've been fishing for probably 2 or 3 years is the TRD tubes. This is a deadly wintertime bait. And I will fish this a little bit slower than I normally fish because you got all these little legs back here, and when it's just sitting, they're kind of waving in the current. And I'll fish most of these creature baits around oysters or structure because you'll have little mud crabs and stuff like that they're eating on in the shells and the dock pilings. And then like the Gobius is another good one for creeks with mud minnows or bait fish in them. And then early in the winter, these salty Ned shrimps are great. When you still have a bunch of those small little shrimps in the creek. Right now, you don't see too much of that, but they're still great baits as well.
In case somebody wants to see it.
And then, yeah, depending on the weather and the day that I'm fishing, those high pressure days, bluebird days.
What's high pressure? Break that down a little bit.
Yeah, barometric.
Is it
that's
cloudy?
Just like there's not a cloud in the sky. Sunny day. Everything's like nice and slicked off. I'm throwing a lot of the small baits, even on cold days in the winter, like when you get a warming trend coming, and you have a little bit lower pressure. I'll throw bigger baits like the goat, the Z-Man goat. Love this bait. This to me is another like kind of crab bait, creature bait style. They they will hit bigger baits in the wintertime. Everything's not super finesse fishing. Throwing the 4-inch diesel minnows and stuff like that, and the creeks with a bunch of mullet in it. Like, you get those days in the wintertime where they're not super picky, and you can catch them on bigger baits. The bigger baits get their attention better, and they're not super spooky as well. But on those high pressure days, like fishing something small, I fish them a little quicker for kind of a reaction bite. I think that's mostly what I get when I'm fishing those small baits fast, just bringing it across their face real quick, and they just turn and grab it. But you know,
What kind of rigs you guys use?
for like rod, like line and stuff like that.
Not line, but Carolina rigs.
No,
Oh,
so
for live bait.
for live bait or for artificials. So for artificials, I'm just using like I have 15-pound braid, and I use like a 12 or 15-pound leader. Sometimes I'll up it to 20 if I'm fishing some heavy structure. But basically like a 3 to 4 foot section of leader, and then straight to the artificial. This other bait too. This jig. This is the micro finesse jig that I put the TRD bugs on the back of. It's kind of like a bass bait, but this is a deadly bait for redfish. Don't really catch too many trout on it, but redfish love it. But yeah, like if I were to fish like live bait, like on my charters or something, same thing, 3 to 4 foot leader, maybe like 2 split shots and like a 1/0 circle hook with like a mud minnow or cut bait or something.
I'll just run a jig head.
But
I'm
yeah,
throwing mud minnows or like shrimp. Like if I got some live shrimp, I'll just pinch the tail off of a live shrimp and throw it on a jig head and pitch that out there. Let it sit on the bottom of one of these holes in the creeks, and they'll crush it. Or mud minnow. I'll tail hook my mud minnows. So instead of hooking them through the lips, I hate that. The bait just sits down there and doesn't do anything. Hook them through the body about halfway back towards the tail. They'll die fast, but when they're sitting on the bottom, they're just thumping and thumping and thumping and thumping, and they'll get hammered normally. So yeah, that's a good live bait deal there. Like I was sitting here thinking when Nick was talking, on a day like today, where we know some good cold fronts are about to come in, we got flags ripping, it's windy. This would be a great day to go fish a river or the intercoastal or docks. So if I looked out and I'm going to go fish today because I'm sick of sitting around, I'm going to go dock fish, and I'm looking for that 5 to 10 foot range in a creek. So like a dock with the creek bend that we talked about, something like that. That would be the first place I'm going to if we have this kind of weather.
When you're fishing those docks and it's 5 to 10, you want the end of the dock to be to that 10-foot range, and then kind of the base of it be more like a shallower 5-foot range.
That's
Yeah.
Yep. As long as the dock has water at low tide, that's the big key. I don't normally like any docks that are bone dry at low tide. Normally they suck. So you can eliminate, like if you're in a creek with a bunch of docks, you can eliminate a lot of them by just going out at low tide one day and figuring out, all right, that creek holds water still, like there's some oysters on it and structure. Then you can skip fishing like 20 or 30 or 40 docks by looking at, all right, that one holds water, this one doesn't. So then you can automatically go, next time you go fishing, go to those creeks with water, and normally you'll crush them.
When you fish those same docks at high tide as well.
Yes.
Yeah, high tide it gets a little bit tougher though. They kind of sometimes will suspend on the docks or like move way up them. But once you find them,
Yeah. Sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'll still throw a 1/8 or even a 1/10 because I want it to fall slow.
Yeah, because there are times. So wintertime is great for it, and I've done it a good bit. Like when I'm searching docks, like a lot of times in the winter, if you get a nice sunny day and you got clean water, a lot of times I'll just cruise past them on the trolling motor, look under them, and I'll either see them or I won't. So I'm not having to spend 5-10 minutes fishing the dock. But there'll be times where you'll find a dock and you'll see fish under it, and those fish might be in 6 feet of water, but they're 3 feet off the bottom, kind of suspended. So you still want a lighter jig head, so you're in the strike zone a little bit longer, and it's not just shooting down past them real quick.
This will help somebody. So I kind of have a little system I'll go through. If I'm fishing somewhere I know there's fish, so like let's just say a dock, right? Let's say I'm fishing a dock, it's my favorite spot, and I got a good tide, and I know there's fish there. I got a couple nibbles, but they won't commit, right? So I'm going to go through a couple different baits before I go to a new spot. So I'll probably fish a 3-inch minnow, I'll throw a goby. I'll throw a little shrimp. I'm going to try a couple different baits before I move on. So, and then, definitely add Procure. And then if the water's clean, bump your leader down. If the water's a little dirty, you don't have to worry about your leader. But, if there's fish somewhere and they're just not biting, like try a couple different things before you just leave and go somewhere else.
What size leader are you guys using?
15 to 20 fluoro.
I would say average. I'm normally starting out with 15.
15.
Yep.
All right, retrieves. Show us a retrieve, how you work your baits.
Well, yeah. So when I'm working my baits, I'm always rod tip up, and I'm pop pause, pop pause. I do not pause for more than a second. I can't do it. I think I might get distracted and pause for like 3 seconds, and I might get a bite doing that. But I'm pop, reel up the slack, pop. Sometimes I'll just do one or two if I'm working something small and I want to kind of work like if I know, all right, I have a little chute between some oysters, between two oyster bars, and it's like 3 feet long. I might do shorter pops to keep the bait in the zone a little bit longer. But I tend to keep it moving a little bit more. You can pop it, let it sit for a second. So, and if it's low enough and the water's clean and you can see your bait, you can see how the fish react to your bait. There are probably plenty of times where I'm working my bait and I got a fish coming up on it and I pull it out of its face and he's just sitting there looking at it and it just keeps getting further away. So at that point, like I'd slow it down, let it sit. Throwing Procure on your bait, you might let it sit for 5 seconds and that fish, will come and slurp it up because it gets that scent. But I'm a big rod tip up kind of guy, and there'll be sometimes like if I'm working like a bait that I think is going to mimic a crab, then I'm still rod tip up, but like my pops are more like drags because you'll have crabs are more kind of crawling on the bottom versus like a bait fish is like kicking up and then maybe falling down, kicking up again. But I'll drag more with the creature baits than I will with like 4-inch jerk shad or like a gobius.
So I'll go a little slower. So he'll tend to work baits a little faster. Let's see if I can do this in here. I like I like my bait where I'm barely working it like this. All right. I don't know if y'all can see that here. I'll do it down the middle so everybody can see better. So barely working. Then I'll let it sit. And then that's Z-Man and that's Elastec. So it's going to float up, right? So it's going to be just sitting there on the bottom. It won't be laying down like that. It'll be standing up. Drag it a little bit more. Thank you. About to set the hook, man. I haven't set the hook in like a day or two. I'm missing it. So yeah, and if we're in an area where I know that there's fish, in a creek hole or fishing trees, laydowns, docks, I might throw one up under there and just let it sit there. So put Procure on it, just let it sit for sometimes for like 30 seconds or a whole minute. It'll drive him crazy.
Well, like when we fish tournaments, sometimes
Gulp.
like
Yeah, talk about
I'm
gulp.
big. That's about the only time I can work something slow, and I'm not even working it. But I'll throw a gulp, on a Ned head, or I'll even throw it on a Carolina rig, and just chunk it up there, throw the rod in the rod holder, and eat a sandwich or something. And that's basically fishing bait, but with an artificial, and it works great. I catch plenty of fish doing that in tournaments. And so, that's what I have to do to slow myself down. But just the scent is huge.
So if you're throwing Ned, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just got another question.
Yeah.
The dock. When you guys are approaching the docks, you go ahead and set up upstream of them. You guys stay pretty far off.
No,
Oh,
I'm
that's a
down
good.
current.
Let's talk about
Down
that.
current. So
Yeah.
most of the time your fish are going to be facing the current. And so, like if I'm fishing a dock, what I'll do first is I'll be down current of it, and I'm going to work like the walking part of it first. So like depending on how much of the pier head is in the water, but if you have like the skinnier part of the dock, then I'll throw under the dock probably like 5 or 6 feet past it, and then because most of the time everything's going to be sitting like right around the pilings. If it's a sunny day and you got a good shadow from the dock, they'll be sitting in the shadow. And so you got to throw past them and just work it like there's a bait, just cruising down current, and that's how you want to approach a dock.
So like if this was our dock, we'll just show you. So the current's going to be coming towards me, okay? Current's coming towards me. The table's our dock. Imagine I'm a little farther away. I don't want to be this close. But I'm going to pitch up and kind of work it back to me. All right. And then I'll come out and be over here in the marsh and cast across and then swing my bait down with the current. So I'm swinging it right into their face. Does someone have a question? I thought somebody raised their hand.
Yeah, so when you're working it slow, like you just talked about, specifically like with the Gobias, where are a lot of people, if they're fishing really cold water for the first time, where are they going to miss the bite? Right? It's different.
So if we're dock fishing, right, then a lot of times you're going to get the strike right by the dock. So once I'm off the dock a little bit, I'm going to reel it back in and recast and keep my bait in the strike zone as long as I can. So definitely when you're casting near a dock, when your bait's falling, make sure your line's tight, because a lot of times you're going to get the bite right when it's landing. And a lot of people will miss bites all the time. I charter full time. I watch people miss fish all the time. I get to watch it and watch miss hook sets. And so keeping your line tight is like the biggest tip that I can give you to make sure you're catching more fish. Just keep your line tight right when your bait's land. So when I cast, look at my left hand. My left hand's right here on the reel, and look at my line. It's already tight. Now, if it's windy, that's not going to happen. We already know that. I'm going to have a loop. But keep your hand right by your reel so you can close it faster, and your line's tight way faster. And you won't have wind knots that way, because if your hand's closing it, you won't get any wind knots. But yeah, that'll catch you a lot more fish, having to just keep that line tight.
And then back to your question about how to approach a dock. That's also approaching it the way we do is also why that lower outgoing tide is our favorite tide to fish creeks, is because all those fish are like, we're coming into the creek and they're looking away from us, and we're casting in front of them, bringing it back to them. So I'd say 99% of the time fish are facing up current, waiting for the bait to come to them. And so you can transition that to just about anywhere, whether you're fishing a point, a dock, a creek, a grass line, anything.
Something else that sorry, go ahead.
Will you ever enter a creek with tide incoming, and so now you got the current against you, and you're trying to figure out what to do, or will you always enter a falling tide so that as you're talking the narrow?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Will you always enter a falling tide, or what do you do if it's incoming?
So there's plenty of creeks that we fish that at low tide, they close off, and there's still fish back in the creeks. And so, if we're on a charter or something like that, we don't want to get stuck back there with them all the time. Maybe sometimes we do, but not always. So we'll go into those creeks as the water's coming in, just work them a lot slower. Like, as you're coming into it, like if you got, a deep hole and an oyster bed on the backside of it, like work that deep hole first, because most likely those fish are going to be sitting in that deep hole from hanging out at low tide, and then they're going to start moving back. So you're kind of at that point, as the water's coming in, like depending on the creek, those fish usually start to move back. So you're still kind of somewhat, casting in front of them, and bringing it back to them. So sometimes they will be like, if you got a nice like oyster shelf or something in the middle of the creek, they'll sit on that, and that can be a little bit tougher to get the right presentation to them. A lot of times, like if you can cast kind of at an angle and let it swing into them versus like casting past them and bringing it back. So
Something I thought of. I'll answer your question 1 second. Most of at dead low tide, normally the fish, for me, my favorite creeks that I fish, the fish tend to be right by the mouth of the creek at low tide. they're not going to be like a mile up the creek. So focus on the first couple of holes. Spend your time. Go really, really slow. Pull in and just stop your boat and spend 15 minutes at least minimum, and just really break that hole down. Throw different baits. Try a couple different presentations, and then move farther in the creek. So take your time. Don't like rush in. Take 5 casts and then hurry up and go to the next part. Like really go slow, because you'd be surprised a lot of how many fish you're just going to run over if you're trolling motor in or push pulling. Really go. I like to go slow, especially now. Once you know that there's fish there, yeah, I mean you can cruise right in, get the job done, and roll. Right, you make it happen, make it fast. What you got, Robbie?
Two questions.
Yep.
How often are you adding Procure, and two, are you using corks?
Procure, it depends. Like sometimes you can just whack them without Procure, and just you're catching them good. If it's a kind of a hard day, if it's a grinder, I'm putting it on a lot.
Define a lot. Every 15 casts?
15, 20, yeah.
15, 20?
You don't have to do that. You can put it on one time and it's still going to work. But every little thing adds up to a win. You know, every 1% adds up. So having a sharp hook and making sure I've got plenty of stank on my bait is going to equate to more fish in the boat. So it's just a numbers game.
You guys much around with top water in the wintertime?
Yes. Smaller top waters.
Skitter walk, the bass model skitter walk. So it's like a, what is it? Is it the 8? They call it.
I'm not sure about the skitter
Yeah.
box. Yeah.
I like the 8. I don't like the big one. I hate the big one. It's too big.
I'll fish the Hedon Boyo. It's like a tiny version of the spook. That's a really good one.
So
And then-
top water.
And then
Go ahead.
also with, like, I love these for top water. It's kind of like, it'd almost be like a frog, but you put these on their weightless EKG hooks, and you can, pull it through and the legs kick and you can stop it and then pull it again. I mean, it's like just kind of like a slow rip bait, but it's kind of like a frog. And I'll throw these like around some shallow oyster bars. This is the goat. Yeah.
So top water, like
Hardest time of day for top water in the wintertime.
in the winter, again, going back to the low tide, we want our low tide at 10 in the morning or later. Same thing.
Yeah.
Normally in the winter, I'm not getting out at 7 in the morning. We're going to the diner and going to get breakfast first. Okay. You laugh, I'm serious.
You can throw it for, like if I'm fishing the wintertime for big trout, like I'll throw it all day long. Sunny, cloudy, like I'll throw top water all day long.
But fish it slow. So like when I let my top water land, and like Roland Martin talks about, like let all the ripples go away. So I might sit there for like 10 or 15 seconds. And a lot of times I'll catch so many redfish and trout when it's just sitting there, not doing anything. It just lands out of the sky and the fish is sitting there like, oh, what's this? Bam, and they'll smoke it.
Don't keep walking it back and forth, let it sit.
I would let it sit. I always let mine sit first. So right when it lands, let it sit there for a long time, especially in the winter. And then I'm going to go, I'll probably do 3 or 4 walks, twitch, 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 and then let it sit again for 5 or 10, 15 seconds. Just slow, super slow. Remember, the water's cold and they're cold-blooded fish. So they're just moving real slow.
You'll figure it out pretty quick. If you're throwing a top water and you're fishing some shallower water, if you're throwing it for redfish, you cast it up and you start walking it back, they're either going to hit it or you're going to see wakes just go. They're going to spook. And at that point, grab something else. Throw a little bit more finesse.
One other thing I had wrote down here, a warming trend, you'll tend to get a little bit happier fish. So next week we got 50s and 60s high and 40, something in the 40s for the lows at night. So a day or two of that, probably like Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, after all this cold comes through, the fishing, I'm expecting to be really, really, really good, especially after this cold front. The fish are going to be really chewing, or they're probably chewing like crazy today and tomorrow before the storm comes through. So, and I'm trying to pick some like scenarios that y'all can see, like really apply this on your own. So like today would be a really good day to fish. Don't worry about the wind. So that's why we're creek fishing. We're getting out of the wind.
Yep.
Okay. So you might have a little open water to cross or whatever, but I'm in a little 18-foot John boat. So I don't want to be blowing around this crap anyway. It's not even any fun to fish. So you get up in a little creek and you're out of the wind, and the wind keeps the bugs away. So in general, this is the days you want to go creek fishing because then you don't have the gnats tearing you up.
Talk about the action on the rods you're using.
Yes.
And the retrieve on the reel.
Yep, I was gonna say that and I totally forgot. So for any of the Ned rigs, all the little baits, all winter, I bought these rods just for winter fishing. This is a medium light. It's a 6 to 10 pound rod, a 7-footer.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
seven. You can do like a 6'10" through
Yeah.
like a 7'1".
This is a 6'10" medium light extra fast. Yeah, but it feels a little bit slower than that, but it's still, this is a world class.
How do you handle redfish? Set the hook, I've heard start reeling.
So it depends. So with this hook, with those little thin hooks that I use, like CA was talking about, punching a tomato with a needle is the same thing. These are tiny little thin hooks. If you set the hook too hard, you're going to bend it and break the hook with this exact hook. So it depends. I know that's not what you want to hear.
You still want to set the hook
With
with a circle hook. You start reeling. You don't set the hook with a circle hook. Any other hook, you might, if it's like a stout, trout eye jig head, you can hammer them. Something like that, a little bit softer. You still want to set the hook, but with the circle hook,
fast. Like if I get a bite, I'm setting the hook right away. Boom, slam them, smoke them right away. Don't wait, because you don't know if that fish is just going to let go. Because in the winter, if they're being finicky, especially, they'll just nibble the tail or something, or they'll grab it real and then let go. If you're fishing pressured water, like fish that probably get guides are hammering them every day, and you're sliding in there on the weekend or on a Monday you took whatever, then you want to be on your game. So, and then I throw 10-pound braid or 8. So I'll throw a little bit lighter braid than Nick does. But that's just because I could feel it's a little more sensitive. I generally fish smaller stuff more often than Nick does. So Nick's throwing a little bit bigger baits. I throw, and that's just our own styles. We all got what we prefer. But yeah, I generally set the hook in general, except for top waters. Don't set the hook on the top water.
You stay completely away from high tide.
you can.
I don't like them.
Well, I guess it
A
depends.
flood tide in the winter.
Yeah, it depends on your boat. Yeah. No, it depends on your boat. So like if you have a smaller boat that you can, like I fish some stuff in the Wando, where there'll be schools of fish and maybe 30 yards back, 40 yards back in the grass, you'll have a little creek that winds into like an open mud pocket. Like they'll be up there sunning in that high tide, especially in the afternoon this time of year, and that's kind of what I'm focusing on. I don't really I wouldn't be really creek fishing at high tide. I'm still looking for
That's a good point.
that shallower water where those fish are warming up on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Rocks.
Yeah.
Rocks on a rise are really good. So you
They're-
find a little
yeah.
rock pile, riprap, anything that the fish can go when the water rises, that the fish could just go vertically up with it, and they have a backstop.
Mhm.
So like all the shell bars we get around here, like those big, just long shell bars, those are good on on a rising tide, because then the fish won't just like peace out and roll out in the grass and go places that are really tough to catch them.
The numbers, your numbers aren't going to be as high as they would be fishing like low waters in the creeks, but like you could definitely still catch fish at high water this time of year.
Just seems to be more of a grind.
It is. Yeah.
It is. It's way easier with a falling tide or a low, because all those fish get condensed, and that's what's great about creek fishing, is they've only got so much place to go. There's only they can't hide that far. They're in here, and you can catch them. What else we got? What other questions we got?
Yeah, whatever.
Oh,
I was gonna say to anything on setting up, they're light in your drag anyways, so when you're setting up, you're not gonna snap.
Yeah.
It's not the hook.
Yeah, with those lighter wire hooks.
somebody else had a
Go ahead.
question.
Are there any opportunities to fish if you don't have a boat? Creeks or
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, before I had a boat in high school, I was finding walk-to spots. Try and find some like get on Google Earth and some of the
Ponds.
some of the low tide shots. you can see like shelly banks. Like I'd walk down to those banks, and you'll have like little feeder creeks that they might not have 100 fish in them, but they should have 5 fish in them. You just got to spend some time looking around, and obviously Google Earth. You might see a creek that looks amazing, has everything it should. You get there, and it has the depth, it has the structure, but it doesn't have bait. And you might not have fish in it. So it's a lot of, what'd you say, like 80% of
80-20.
Yeah.
80% of the creeks won't have fish. 20% will.
Yeah.
And if you figure that out, let me know why. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Back to this question about like the Cajun thunder or the pop.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In the wintertime, do you use them?
Um,
And why not?
You can go and I'll go.
So there are some creeks where, like, say if I'm on, if I'm on a charter and my people that I'm taking out are very inexperienced, and I'm fishing a creek and the fish are kind of suspended, like over an oyster bar or next to a dock or something. I'll have them, throw a cork but not pop it. Basically, throw it up current and drift it straight into their face. Kind of like the cork. The cork is basically just holding the bait suspended, but don't pop it. For me, I'm not. This past year fishing some tournaments with Steven, like I've kind of gotten a little bit more confidence with the corks, like popping them, but I've never been real, confident in popping a cork for redfish in our waters. To me, it seems to spook them more. So if I'm using a cork, it's more so, to keep that bait suspended, that whether it's off oyster shells or, having it come past a dock or something, if those fish are suspended, or, if those fish are in 3 feet, 4 feet, I want that bait to kind of float right over their head and they just kind of come up and slurp it. But I don't pop it.
Like I love popping corks in the fall. So Zima makes the prawn star shrimp. I don't think I threw my shrimp net more than like 10 times this whole fall. Like we just threw the prawn star under the corks, and like I was confident enough that they were going to work to not screw with live bait, and we completely wrecked them. But so yeah, so I do tend to use popping corks a lot. I'll put on I like the 4 horsemen cork. They're a little more expensive, but they're heavier duty. So I'll do a 4 horsemen. I like green. I don't like red or orange. If I have red or orange, it's because I got old dudes fishing with me and they can't see it. It's freaking loud. I'm trying to help you out, man. I like green, and I like where the paint's kind of wore down, where it's kind of white. I don't know. It's kind of a mind thing for me. I feel like the fish always see these bright corks, on the weekends and stuff, and I'm throwing something white. I don't know. It kind of blends in a little, makes me feel like I'm going to catch more fish. I don't know if it's true. And then I'll throw a 15-pound fluorocarbon leader, anywhere from 2 to 8 feet. Sometimes I'll throw a long leader, depending on how deep we're fishing. But in general, if I'm fishing like the flats or just general creek fishing, I'll do about a 2-foot leader on purpose. And if I want my shrimp to sink fast, I'll throw lighter leader. If I want my shrimp to fall and sink slower, I'll throw 25 or 30-pound leader, because that heavier leader is going to take longer to sink.
Yeah, mono floats, fluorocarbon sinks. So
Do you have a knot preference for leader to braid?
Leader to braid. Oh, I normally do like the Alberto or the modified Albright or those. He ties the FG, but I can't stand that.
There's a video on YouTube. I tie it put the braid around my pinky and just use my hands, rod and rod holder, and once you get that dialed, you can tie it really quick on a boat.
But I get more casts than he does when he's tying that knot. So.
How do you finish that?
What's that?
How do you finish it?
Just 2 overhand knots, I guess.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
Nobody sees that.
I keep it simple. Try and somewhat.
And how many wraps do you make?
I make 16 with the light stuff. Heavier, like for my tarpon stuff, I'll do like 22. But yeah, the 10-pound,
10 pounds,
50, or 16.
I want to talk about corks one more time
You
too.
do it one-handed.
Oh,
Well, you know, braid and then like that.
For the corks. So I don't throw corks in the winter. I think it spooks them. I don't ever have any luck with it. Never have. Yeah, I've never had a good day. Like when I say winter, I'm talking like now, February and half of March. So starting around late March, once we really start getting warm, you know, everything's warming up, then I'll start throwing corks again. I don't know. Don't really, you know, the reds are schooled up in big schools and they're in shallower water. So when you got this big cork just splashing and the water's clear, and I think you can watch them just dissipate, and then there they go. And then you either gotta, you know, mess around and let the fish calm down. You can catch them again or whatever. But I think they tend to spook fish, in my opinion.
I guess if you're trying to, that's where I get confused. If you're trying to fish over oysters,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about spinning it for
Mm-hmm.
less good fish.
Yeah.
And keep it off the oysters. How you just do that with ultralight jig head or something like that?
Just
or
go lighter.
Just lighter, so it's not
Lighter.
spinning
Yep.
fast.
Yeah.
So we let
And then
it-
kind of swim
Like
it.
like without a cork, you're talking?
Right, if you go
Yeah, I
forward.
mean, you know, depending on the way, if they're live oysters, especially, you're gonna get hung up and broke off. I don't care how good you are. You know, if you're not working that bait down, you know, either in the shells or just over the top of them, you know, you might probably not gonna get bit. So you know, fishing structure, if you're fishing it hard, you're gonna break off or you know get hung up. But the lighter stuff definitely helps you know prevent that.
This is a great bait that I'll throw over oysters. The hook's up at the top. It's pretty hidden. And if this gets stuck, it's hard to show you here, but you can flex your rod. Here, flex this and show them the old poppy pop.
Yeah, you could do it on the podium probably.
There. All right. Let me see what we're looking at here. All right. You got it good?
I'm not good at hooking the hanging, are they?
You got hold it tight. Hold it tight. Just don't let go.
Okay.
All right. So if that's hung up on an oyster bar, I like to flex my rod about this, literally this exact angle. What, 10 o'clock? Flex the rod. I'm going to pull the line out and pop it. Okay, as long as you don't set the hook into the oyster bar, normally that bait will come off and you can get it out of there. So yeah, it's a little hard to demonstrate here, but yeah, if you get hung in an oyster bar, try that. So before you set the hook, don't set the hook in the oyster bar or it won't work. But generally, because what happens is, as long as you have a round, I like these jig heads because they're round. See how it's round? So it doesn't like really wedge too bad. If you use this a regular old jig head like those crappier, you know, 12 pack for $1, little red ones, they wedge in there and you can't get those out. But when they're round, normally it'll just kind of hit it. And if you pop it, it throws a little slack in there and it'll shake back out. But yeah, that's great. Then you don't break off 20 times when you're fishing oysters. It's such a pain when that happens. Really good. I'd say it works like 60 or 70% of the time. Just don't set, if you set the hook though, it won't work. All right. Any other questions? What you got?
I know you said you're not really using the popping cork as much in the wintertime.
Yeah.
But explain that scenario of that 8-foot leader.
So that is so in the spring, like in March, when the trout are starting to come on up from the deep waters, then if I'm fishing like anywhere from 8 to 15 feet of water, and I notice that the trout, if I throw like a little jig and I let it sink all the way to the bottom and they hit it on the bottom, some clients that they struggle fishing this stuff that deep because it's hard. It's very hard to feel a bite. So yeah, I'll run a 7.6-foot rod, so 7 foot 6 inches, way longer, so you can actually cast a little bit. Yeah, it's tricky to cast that, but you kind of just heave it out there. But yeah, you'll run like a 7-8 foot leader, and then like a thick shrimp under it. And yeah, for that though, I'm waiting. You know, I'll let it sink, and then probably about every 10 seconds or so, I'll do 3 pops. So pop, 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 and then reel. So the shrimp comes way up, and then it has a couple seconds to fall back down again. Because remember, if you guys watch a redfish eat a shrimp, like the shrimp's going backwards like this, but normally it just pauses. It doesn't just keep going and going and going. So whenever you're throwing corks or you're throwing a shrimp lure, I like 2 or 3 pops. So pop, 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 and then let it sit. And then you're really mimicking what an actual shrimp does, and they'll normally crush it. All right. Anybody else?
When you're talking about 80% of things are going to
Yep.
Like, once you kind of establish that there's no fish there, how long before you come back? Is it just written off forever for you, or?
That's hard, man. You can ask
Every-
him. We'll go visit
every
stuff
year.
all the time.
I check it. I'll check it again every year. Like there's stuff that I fish in the Wanda that I've been fishing 15 years and never seen a fish in the creek, and I'll check it and there's 75 fish in there this winter. So it just depends.
But it's not something that, like, a couple weeks.
Or even seasonal. Maybe once a season, right? Once in the fall, once in the
Yeah.
spring.
Yeah, so and it could like if you have a school of fish like outside of the creek on a grass line or something, as it warms up in the summer months, you'll have some fish go up into the creeks. But in the wintertime, you kind of figure out the creeks that hold fish, and those are going to be pretty consistent for you just about all winter.
And at low tide, like a lot, if the fish aren't in the creek, they'll be on the outside flat. So like if you got a long, huge mud flat, and then you got the creek, you could see like, oh look, there's fish here at low tide. Huh. More than likely, they're going to be using that creek normally. They're not just going to like skip the creek. So yeah, if there's a school nearby and you got a creek, like you can fish that different tides and really track those fish, and then you can really dial in. All right, at this time in the tide, when we got a foot of water left in our tide, then those fish will be right here and right here. And that's when we're like guiding. You're like, oh, we just show up and catch fish everywhere we go. Well, no, it's because we got it down. We fished those spots for 6 or 7 hours and figured out, okay, the fish are here now, and then in an hour they'll be here, and you know what I'm saying? You can really track them and know exactly where they go.
Yeah, you all mentioned earlier about brackish water.
Mhm.
How often do you fish it in? You said it's just really good in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
And like, how far up would it make that transition from salt to fresh? Or
That's a touchy subject. If I give away too much information on that,
so that's why
someone will hunt me down and kill me.
You can catch largemouth, redfish,
All in the
striper,
same spot.
all in the same spot.
I fish the Clipper a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not a bit fish.
Yeah.
I'm a captain.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to get into it.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know how far I would have to ride because I live right on the river. How far do I ride? Because I'm up, beyond Bushy Park.
They're all over around Bushy
Yeah,
Park.
A 16-pounder was caught right here at my dock.
Yeah.
And it was fresh. Well, it's still hot.
So like
So,
you'd be surprised, like in Louisiana, like you'll be fishing like straight fresh water and catching reds. Because like redfish
Right.
adapt really easy. Trout are a little more crazy with salinity levels. But like specifically redfish, they can handle a lot of stuff as long as it's gradual. Like if you get a bunch of rain, like in August when Georgetown got 20 inches of rain, like that screwed up the fishing. Every species was jacked up, and you could only like fish the jetties by the ocean because even in Winyah Bay you couldn't even catch because there's too much fresh water. But like if it's gradual, it's like in the winter, like I said, they go up the river. So just take a little time and go explore and play around. You'd be surprised.
right, yeah. I didn't know how often y'all fish that type. Like,
I fish that stuff all the time towards Georgetown.
what about in the Clipper River?
Sometimes with Dave Flad. Dave loves that area. Go chat with him. He's at Release Over 20. Yeah, go pick his brain. I don't want to share what he doesn't want me to share. Do what?
Who's this guy?
Dave Flad.
Dave
He
Black.
should be at the Release Over 20 booth.
Okay.
Yeah, he's super knowledgeable about that stuff.
How much time, since you guys are hitting these same schools throughout winter, how much time are you like leaving between when you go back to that same school?
Oh,
you're
good
not
question.
Smoking around.
Good question. Go ahead.
Yeah, it just kind of depends on how long you want to catch those fish. If you want to catch them all winter, like I wouldn't hammer them for a week straight because then they're going to get smart. They're going to kind of get real finicky, especially on the right tide. They might start locking up. But when me and Steven were fishing the other day, I had fished that creek 2 days before, probably caught 15 or 20 fish, kind of left them. Like if we're getting ready for a tournament or something and we have a spot that we're like, all right, great fish in this creek, we'll hit it like, a month beforehand, or we might go in like the week of the tournament, catch one fish, make sure they're right, and then not touch them, so that we can go, get on them good. I'd say if you give it about a week,
A
week
week's a
and a
good
half,
time, yeah.
if you're there every day, that they're going to catch on pretty quick. Then you'll have to go to live bait, catch them on live bait. You can hammer them on artificials and then switch to live bait. They'll eat that. But, yeah. But yeah, we appreciate y'all coming in. Appreciate y'all's time.
Yeah, thanks, appreciate it.